Welcome to Grand Canyon University's Canyon Professional Development. Today we are going to spend some time discussing Topic 3, Multi-Tiered System of Supports, also known as MTSS, Schools, and Social Emotional Learning. My name is Wendy Norberg, and I'm currently a K-6 instructional coach. I have 23 years in education in varied roles. In this course, participants will define and identify examples of Tier 1, 2, and 3 SEL interventions. Participants will compile a list of research-based interventions available throughout their school and district. They will also determine which intervention resources will be utilized to implement Tier 1, 2, and 3 instruction. Take a minute to reflect on how you would define social emotional learning based on all you have learned about SEL. Keeping in mind, SEL involves the development of skills in self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. This learning and development of SEL skills can take place in the classroom, within the school, with families and caregivers at home, and in the community. SEL should be included in MTSS. In 1997, the Reauthorization Act of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, called for positive behavior intervention and supports, also known as PBIS, to ensure students with disabilities were not excluded from educational opportunities due to behavior disorders or issues. It soon became evident that the interventions and instructions the identified students were receiving would benefit all students, and PBIS shifted to a school-wide approach. When behaviors occur that interfere with academic or social emotional learning, PBIS calls for data-driven decision-making, progress monitoring, and tier evidence-based intervention, similarly to what we do with academics. The MTSS process should consider the whole child. This better allows educators to determine the placement of the student on which behavior or academic tier. Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3. ACEs and traumatic experiences should be considered when discussing presenting concerns. For example, are the students' behaviors a result of their academic struggles, or are their academic struggles a result of their behaviors? Always keep in mind the why of MTSS. It is an approach to find more effective instructional and intervention strategies to help students, as opposed to a path for students to qualify for special education. Tier 1, 2, and 3 SEL interventions look like those described below. Tier 1 interventions should be for 80 to 90% of the students. They are universal, high-quality supports. They involve practices focused on positive behaviors and creating a positive school climate for all students. The goal of Tier 1 instruction is to prevent behaviors. Tier 2 instruction should entail about 5 to 15% of students. These are targeted small group, evidence-based interventions. These are for students not responding to Tier 1 supports, or they may be students at risk for more serious behaviors. This may be due to ACEs the students have experienced. Tier 3 is for 1% to 5% of students. This involves intensive, individualized interventions. These are for few students. These are students not responding to Tier 1 or 2 interventions. It's important to note that schools need to make sure that they work very hard in Tier 1 interventions so that this pyramid does not become upside down, with very few students in Tier 1, more students in Tier 2, and the greater number of students in Tier 3. If 80% of the students are not in Tier 1, then it's very important for students and teachers to work on intensive interventions, and strong instructional strategies should be implemented. Social emotional Tier 1 supports are universal. They're campus-wide clear behavior expectations. They are communicated to all participants clearly and effectively. Teaching strategies are used to teach students the expected behaviors. Positive behavior reinforcements are used when desired behaviors are exhibited. So remember, this is for the greatest number of our students, 80 to 90% of our students. Tier 2 instruction entails the use of Tier 1 instruction to be continued. It might be small group work. A student might have an individualized behavior plan or contract. Explicit instruction is given for students, teaching them how to regulate their behaviors. Relationships are created strategically with the selected adults on campus. Students might check in with these adults. When possible, family involvement is encouraged. Remember, Tier 2 is 5 to 15% of our students. The next tier, Tier 3, is only for 1 to 5% of our students. When Tier 3 interventions and instruction is taking place, Tier 1 and 2 instruction continues. This might involve one-on-one work with a social worker or a counselor. The students might have a behavior assessment, a functional behavior assessment, if necessary, and the student is considered to be a suicide risk. Threat assessments are done as needed. There might be collaboration with outside agencies. Key players in each tier involve whole group instruction is the Tier 1, classroom teacher, paraprofessionals. The counselor might come in and teach whole group lessons. Social worker, the school nurse, cafeteria workers, anybody can be a part of Tier 1. Tier 2 or small group instruction involves the classroom teacher, paraprofessionals, instructional specialists, counselor, social worker, the psychologist, school nurse, and cafeteria worker. Tier 3, I put in parentheses that it's still a team approach. It's important for classroom teachers and others in the building to remember that when a student is participating in Tier 3 interventions, they are still receiving Tier 2 and Tier 1 interventions. It is still a team approach. It does not fall on one individual, even though that student may be getting individualized instruction. That student needs Tier 1 and Tier 2 supports from more people. Key players in those tiers need to be a part of this student's healing and this student's improvement. Keeping that in mind, Tier 3 involves the classroom teacher, paraprofessionals, instructional specialists, counselors, social workers, psychologists, school nurse, and cafeteria workers. Let's do some resource action steps. Take some time to identify currently available SEL intervention materials on your campus or in your classroom. Create a list of needed materials for each SEL tier. What funds, if any, do you have available to purchase needed resources? Think outside of the box. If your school has not purchased materials, do you receive PTSO funds? Could you ask for donations from outside agencies? Possibly from outside companies. Let's talk about the intervention implementation. When determining how to progress monitor a student, take a baseline. This might include completing a behavior chart. Maybe you look at a student's behavior for 1 hour and you make a tally for each time that you redirect the student. That would be your baseline. Step 2, provide intervention on a specific skill for a minimum of 4 weeks. So for example, if it was a student to stop interrupting the teacher, you might take tally marks as your baseline and then put intervention strategies in place to help the student gain and improve upon the number of times that they're interrupting instruction. Change the intervention if needed throughout 4 weeks, but make sure to give it enough time to truly take hold. Take a post-intervention score after a minimum of 4 weeks. If post-intervention score shows growth of the targeted skill, keep going, it's working. If the post-intervention score does not show growth of the targeted skill, discuss this with your multi-tiered system support team. When documenting interventions, you want to include the student's name, the person responsible for the intervention implementation, the identified behavior of concern, the behavior target goal. Remember, this should always be aligned with campus-wide expectations. For example, if you are upset with how a student's behaving in the hallway because they're calling out and out of line, however, it's not a campus-wide expectation for students to walk straight and not disturb others in the hallway, then that wouldn't be fair to target this student. Think about expectations expected throughout the campus. Document the date, time, and location of interventions. If an incident occurs, document that. Document the antecedent, or what caused the behavior, or what happened prior to the behavior. Document the intervention used, and document the intervention effectiveness rating. Keep in mind that documentation is essential to ensure research-based interventions are being used consistently. And if they haven't been used consistently, as the adult, make note of that. But don't hold that against the student. SEL programming can have a positive impact up to 18 years later on academics, conduct problems, emotional distress, and drug use. We touched on this in another topic. However, I think it bears reminding the positive effect for a lifetime SEL programming, interventions, and instruction can have on students and our community as a whole. 6 of the top 10 skills identified by the World Economic Forum involve social and emotional competence. 92% of executives that were surveyed say skills such as problem solving and communicating clearly are equal to or more important than technical skills. Allstate, Bank of America, and Google are prioritizing SEL skills and strategies when hiring. If you're a leader on a campus, you can work with teams to develop campus clear-wide expectations. You can model teaching of SEL skills and strategies and reinforce the expectations. Decide how and where to communicate these campus-wide expectations. And as we have reminded in each topic, we are all responsible for modeling, teaching, and reinforcing social-emotional learning expectations. Take it slow. Spend time discussing the importance of and the why social-emotional learning should be a part of your school's MTSS process. Allow time for those discussions. And as always, remember to take time for things that bring you joy and refresh you. Create a need list. What do you need to do to take care of your social-emotional well-being so that you can help your students take care of their social-emotional well-being? Additional course materials can be found here. And you may subscribe for free PD. We hope that you'll join us. And if you'd like more customized professional development, digging deeper into these topics we have touched on, please reach out to us here. Thank you for joining us today.